coming to you live from the heart of Portland, Oregon, December 21st, 2006. Now, my father, being from Afghanistan, of course, did not relate too well with my mother. He was slightly abusive, and of course, there's no question why she left him in the early months of 1980. I was born February 25th, 1980 at Good Samaritan Hospital. I'm a Pisces, of course, year of the monkey. It was a strange time then. My childhood still seems to be stranger today. For the most part, as living with a single mother, the benefit of my early years was that I had the benefit of a somewhat large family at the time and was able to, for a short time, live in a decent part of Oregon that was safe. It was out in Aurora, actually. I'll fast forward to 1986 to 1992. That was where my childhood home was, from the time I was 6 to the time I was 12. Well, my father was the weekend dad, all the way up until my teenage years, which we will get to shortly. That time period was bumpy because it was a constant weaving in and between worlds where I was living. A lot of that took off when I was 12, but prior to that, some of the good parts of my childhood that I retain to this day that helped me as a person is my respect for family. Families that sometimes don't stay together, such as when we were living in the house, it wasn't just me and my mother. It was my grandfather who built that house with his bare hands in 1960 when he started his carpet business around the same time. My grandfather was more my own father in a lot of different ways, taking me camping, taking me fishing, because a lot of the time was spent out alone, at home, watching TV, playing in the trees, playing James Bond, playing radio broadcasting host. Spent a lot of time, for whatever reason, focusing on radio, which is really interesting, making up my own shows, interviewing people. My first interviews were actually conducted when I was 8 or 9, because there was nothing to do. And so my energy was directed in the areas of drawing, comic book art, radio, exercise, wrestling, later on martial arts. And so I was engaged in a lot of positive activities. Despite this major conflict, since my entire life up until today butted heads with my mother, I learned a lot of things about being spiritually open from her. Now, ironically, my mother and I went through a major change in our lives, both at the year of 24 years old. And when she was 24 years old, it was actually when she began to get involved in the spiritual realm, discovering who she was, et cetera, et cetera. And through that, I was privy to a lot of interesting information, people, what I learned from a very early age. Before I really began to make my own mistakes, learn for myself, and discover how I view the world, what is true. I got to be exposed to a lot of different things that didn't really challenge my worldview because I wasn't already programmed to think inside the box at a young age. I think children, when they come to this world, they're not actually born into sin. They actually have a purity about them that humanity alters and changes over time. I can remember riding my bike in Aurora, those meditative experiences at a really young age. And I already was learning about the Matrix at that point. Sometimes people experience some sort of crisis or malady in their lives that is in fact supposed to happen, although we don't know about it at the time. At the time, we think we're actually going through hell. Well, we are in a way. But the major question is, in life sometimes, this is the question to ponder, do we go through things that we don't like or things that may be a nightmare at the moment because we're supposed to learn something from it? So I want to know for so many years why my nomadic moving phase began at the age of 12. At the age of 12 or 13, I was hitting a major cycle in my life. At that time, my grandfather and my grandmother, my grandfather's deceased, but my grandmother is on her way out shortly. She is one of the last living relatives I have that's in this region. They divorced and put it in writing back in 92, 93. That started off me in the beginning of the 5 or 6, 7 high school and middle schools that I went to. Starting with me and my mom moving up here to Portland. At that time, with my father for the most part out of the picture, and moving around and moving away from him First moving from Portland Jackson Middle School to being enrolled in Wilson High School and finding myself getting into a lot of fights, a lot of fist fights. As a teenager, a lot of kids don't get out of the quote-unquote ghetto mind. I learned a lot about alienation. I learned a lot about hate, anger towards my family. I was going through a lot of verbal abuse from my mother at the time. You're no good, you're a loser, blah, da, 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 da. Many of you have gone through the same thing. When I was 14, my warring with her on so many different issues, because I had a big mouth on myself as well, going through a lot of anger, but not really knowing how to process what was going on. Things got worse, and she was really weird in the way that I was corrected. It was very control structure, reptilian mind, R complex, top-down pyramidal power that a lot of parents exhibit on their children because they don't know how to connect with them, but they do know how to control them and punish. Now, this actually warps children's minds later on if they don't grow out of it. Well, I was in that phase of alienation where my mom, the womb that I came from, that I lived all the way up until I was 14, kicked me out of the house on my 14th birthday. From that point, I went in to live with my traumatized grandmother who's coming off the divorce. But then at that time, because I was going through so much, I began to read. And I was drawn. I was drawn to learning about the history of the world. Stuff that I thought I had heard of when I was younger. I was trying to figure out where the truth was, where the BS was, and go through the growth process of becoming a real functioning human being. Now, I remember my mom coming to me and saying she's going to move to New York City, Queens, New York, specifically Flushing. I remember we were living off of 76th and Main Street at the time. And she asked me if I wanted to move with her from Portland, actually Longview, Washington. When I moved with my grandmother, it was in Longview, Washington, and it was R.E. Lee High School I was enrolled in. So at that point, my grades are already starting to plummet, which began a very long string of straight Fs in a couple of different semesters through high school. Long story short, moved to New York, stayed there approximately 2 weeks, was absolutely flabbergasted at the metal detectors at the high school. I forget which high school it was, but I remember it was in the Jamaican neighborhood there. Because of the way the schools were zoned, I had to take 2 buses into this one school, and the school in Queens, I swear, it was like 10 stories tall. 2 weeks short, I moved in with my dad. Now, this is where I started living with this guy for the first time in my life, and it's my first exposure to what quote-unquote Afghanistan is, that other blood of mine that I have denied for so long. But what was frustrating about that time period was I didn't have any direction or anything to learn towards, lean towards, as many young people don't. Living in the mid-90s, where it seems everyone near the inner city is getting involved in fighting, gangs, drugs, whatnot. The only thing that kept me sane in Virginia, living with all these Afghans, was reading about these books that I brought with me that I continued to check out in the library as I entered a new abusive relationship with my father. But his whole thing was our complex top-down pyramidal structure of the Afghan father, who literally, he hasn't groomed me or programmed me to be a slave, as many young kids are taught in the Muslim community to be. I am your brash, American-speaking, English-only speaking guy from the white family who didn't quite fit in with the Afghan family. So my entire life, there's my father. I'm sure he's a good soul. Things were rough, things were really strange. We moved from Springfield, Virginia to Burke, Virginia, because now he was having problems with his brother. We moved to Springfield, Virginia with a woman named Leanne. I remember she drank a lot, just like my dad was starting to do all over again, which is why the marriage failed with my mother. And it was really bizarre, because I remember him coming down, we were living there, and basically getting in my face. And I was coming from the mentality of don't mess with me. And he basically punked me, put me in my spot, and he walked his drunk ass back upstairs. And I remember being in tears, and I couldn't take it anymore, and I was full of rage. So I grabbed my baseball bat, and I went downstairs where he continued to drink and watch the TV, and basically made my mark right there. I said, basically held my bat over his head and let him know, you don't ever talk to me like that ever again. You don't ever abuse me any again. It ends now. I remember him calling the cops on me. That was the first time my dad tried to bring me into the system. And they were basically like, "You're drunk," and I basically admitted what I did, and they were gone. They had a dog there as well. I remember the dog was barking a lot. But that continued over time. Later on, I convinced him that I wanted to come back to Portland. I missed the city so much. I could not handle it. I was losing my friggin' mind in D.C. I attribute that today based upon all the darkness and smog, the condensed population that's there, all the heaviness, the density, the vibration. But I didn't know it at the time. I didn't know why New York freaked me out so much as well. But I'm glad and fortunate that I was able to come back here to my birthplace, using my birth name to do what I do today. When we came back to Portland, actually before that, there was actually a time where he took me to the Department of Health and Services or whatever. He tried to get me committed to juvenile hall because he got my report card. And there were a number of times that I tried to run away. A couple of times I tried to run away when I was 8 or 9, but I didn't know where I would go. My entire time I was trying to figure out why the abuse was going on. Between 16 and 18, we're filled with the average teenage years, trying to figure out if I'm supposed to be going out to the nightclubs. I remember going out to Quest during that time period, trying to make friends in high school. Now that I'm on my 6th high school, by the time I was 18, I was ready to move out. I remember I had my first drink of alcohol when I was 17. I remember just for that, my dad changed the locks on me and tried to get the Portland police to just push me out in the street. So I remember that fantastic day of stepping back and literally just putting my foot through the door. I showed him, but I paid $300 for it. But I learned then at an early time to work for what I wanted and learn to escape my own personal ghetto. My mom was living her life in New York, did not want me to return. Dialogue was very poor on that end. And my father, my relationship with him grew worse and worse. By that time, I'm working full-time at Fred Meyer at Burlingame up on Southwest Barber Boulevard. And I'm just saving up my money. For the first time, I mean, I got like $200 to my name right now in the bank account. But at that time, I remember I had saved up $2 grand. And I remember I put it all in Washington Mutual, and I got all my money together, and I went out and I got my first apartment. Well, that first apartment was cool, but it was also the beginning of a new nightmare for me. My dad, in short, remarried. Recently, he has also had a daughter, so it's a half-sister. I have not met her yet. My first apartment, the Cora Cabana Apartments, very ghetto, on the corner of 37th and Southeast Holgate. Horrible, horrible place to be young and even have a radio. The walls were so thin. It was there that I began to get really depressed about where my life was going, about how I didn't have a clear direction, and I was feeling a lot of energy. The same energy that I have felt my entire life that caused me to feel slightly different than the rest of the world. That is, this world is not as it seems. There is this world, and then there is another one. And there was constantly these premonitions, these dreams that have come to me in a spiritual manner throughout my entire life that I've not been able to describe. And it's not quite at the level of being a psychic or telling you what my reading or channel or download is, because it's not quite that clear yet. But I remember always having these spiritual fights about who I was. I wish I had more time to talk about this, but I remember having these dreams about going through sleep paralysis, fighting Satan head on in a real astral level when I was 8 or 9. These major wars that I was having. So I came into this world also with my mother being told a lot of very strange things about me and the things that I was going to be a part of in my adult life when I was 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And to be honest with you, when you have that much pressure on you to succeed when you're little, it drives you a little bit nuts to be the most spiritual. So there was a lot of superstition there. But in this period, fast forward to where I was now at 18, 19, I was learning how to connect. But that is kind of an overstatement because it wasn't good enough. I was supposed to move a lot further than the rate that I was. Marijuana turned to alcohol, or vice versa, which turned to LSD, turned to mushrooms, turned to off and on full-blown heroin and cocaine for another 5 years, which didn't end until June 4th, 2004, 3 days before going into Hooper Detox. And just to give you an hors d'oeuvre for what I'm going to talk about in the next 5 minutes, 10 minutes, because I need to move forward with this to where we are today. I remember the first time I put the needle in my arm. I remember learning how to cook it up. I remember it was all about escape. And the first time I remember hearing Comfortably Numb by Pink Floyd, I remember that playing in the background. Everything has been synchronistic in my life. And in fact, at that time period, going through what I was going through the escape, I remember sitting in my new apartment in Pearl Court, which is on the corner of like 10th and Johnson by Jameson Square. Before I got into heroin, just knowing because of so much energy, for whatever reason, was surrounding me during that time, because I was supposed to go through that. I know that now. I couldn't see it then. I was supposed to go through every bit of that. The jails, the felonies, everything that followed. I was supposed to go through that. Never hit the streets to the point where I lived on the streets, always somehow tried to keep my job. But I went through different phases in that 4 or 5 years of spiritual experiences, trying to get off the drugs, and basically mixing heroin and cocaine many, many times by injection, doing the drugs for the most part completely alone, because I hated drug addicts. How they looked, how they acted, how they stole, how they smelled, didn't like it. I wasn't going to be like that. So I did it alone. And I can now name about 5 times where I could have already been dead in that 4-year period. One of the times being speeding about 70 miles on a 25-mile-an-hour curve around a hill in Canby, Oregon on Bowling Road, going from Woodburn. Was going way too fast, lost control of my car. Car began to spit off, missed the post by about, the way we estimated, about 3 feet. My car began to go now into the bushes, and I could feel myself spinning. My seatbelt's not on, and I'm watching, yet I'm very calm while this is happening. The windshield, the glass, everything just destroy itself. And I wasn't even covering myself up. I was calm. Now, I was in shock, and I felt like an idiot. But I was calm. I was ashamed. Like more times I would be ashamed and humiliated. On my own volition and free will, I might add, later on. But I survived. Like I survived all those times I did dope alone and fell out while still standing on my feet. And I remember one time I got a batch that was so powerful. And when you're a dope fiend, and you're buying your bags for $10, whatever, underneath the Burnside Bridge, Lloyd Center, you don't share your dope, dude. You don't share your dope. It ain't a friggin' bong. It ain't a beer. It's dope. You don't share that shit. I shared it with a guy. I almost went out by doing half of that. But to make a long story short, the jail, going in and out of jail, having my naked body exposed to the suppressor. I got to watch a lot of different guys get used to that, to where it wasn't a big deal. Turn over, lift your sack, pull your cheeks and cough. Fast forwarding to the spiritual experiences that I started to discover in 2002, 2003, 2004, 2005, 2006, question mark, question mark, question mark, and so on. The prison stuff, the jail stuff, the rehab, the AA, which for the most part is a cult. There isn't a lot of free thinking in AA. I realize that, and I respect you if you found help through AA. I decided that I was going to take my own responsibility for getting sober into my own hands. And I began to pray directly to this universe, not the God, the destroyer. And tap back into the chi energy, the ki energy, and there's something very powerful taking place during that time period. During the time period of 9/11, when I woke up in rehab on the corner of 13th and Southwest Washington without a dime in my pocket in downtown Portland. Still on paper, developing a jacket at that point with the 2 felonies for Rob 3 and possession of a controlled substance, having my DNA taken, becoming a slave, and going through that experience on 9/11 and watching the racism come out of people while trying to figure out who I was, why my father isn't there, why my mother isn't there. No one is there but AA meetings. And I moved on in my life, got the job, got the paycheck, got sober, roommate house here, roommate house here. Till the spiritual energy was just too much. I kept getting drawn back to what I was supposed to do, meditating, getting back in touch with what is reality. And it really hit a peak for me when I did see 9/11 The Road to Tyranny, 2 o'clock in the morning on Channel 23, after bussing tables all night when I was working at the Benson during 2002. Later on, I remember going to a 10-day Vipassana meditation retreat, and then I started to learn about cults, people that are full of dogma on their own right. But it was too intense, and I was still entangled with the fact that I'm going through this pain for a reason. Something's purging from me. But at that time, my wiring in my brain, what the bleep do we know, by the way, articulates this process in the brain very well, the perception, how perception changes from 5 years to 5 years to 10 years to 15 years. And I learned that my wiring was changing. And through my whole recovery process, it was all about, I'm supposed to be doing something. I'm not supposed to be doing this, just working and going to your stupid AA meetings and trying to stay sober and be the nice citizen and getting off paper. There's something more to this. There's something more to this. And I remember reading more, and this knowing, just opening up, and then books that I needed to come to me, literally almost just dropping on my doorstep, or hearing the radio program with that guest at that moment. I remember hearing Clyde Lewis in 2003, hearing him within a night of me learning for a full 6-7 hours about what the microchip implant was after I did my research into 9/11. Now, I wasn't completely off the dope yet, but I was so far involved in what was more important. I remember learning about that and hearing this guy articulate this research I had just done in this hairy, scary, late-night AM radio voice. It was Clyde Lewis, host of Ground Zero. Phone call? I don't know if we're going to get to a phone call. Maybe. We need to get through this. And I remember going through that, learning, reading David Icke's The Truth Will Set You Free. And it was later on in 2004, after I was back out on my own and written a place up on Hawthorne and going through my last phase of drug addiction. Last phase. Sleeping in my car because I pushed it to the very end of how far I can go. Because I realized something. I was going to hit my bottom. I remember sleeping in my car for 3 days. I remember hearing that song by Garbage, "Somebody Get Me Out of Here." And I waited those full 3 days shoplifting from Lloyd Center Safeway just to stay alive, to get into Hooper to save my life. And I remember the other spiritual mentor in my life, my friend Carl. I remember in that time period of not talking to him for so long, meditating, telling him telepathically that I was okay and I was coming back. And I remember him telling me 2 days later when I called him that he got my voicemail, my astral voicemail. And he did say to me as I went through that process of going to the Danmore and then getting out on my own, that was my last chance, that they were giving me. June 4th, 2004, I began to talk about outside the box. I began to get enrolled in classes here at PCM. I began to distance myself from AA and people that were addicted to obsessing about the problem. And I buried the problem and I dealt with that and I moved on. I learned something through a lot of these experiences.